and welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons of role models sharing the knowledge and experience and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you won't miss a new episode. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted to have a conversation with Harry Yeff. Harry, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
Harry, I'm going to introduce you to our audience, and I'm not going to be complete because otherwise I'm going to take too much time of this interview. You are also known as the artist Reaps 100. So you're a London-born neurodivergent artist and technologist specializing in voice. And you have worked with the World Economic Forum. You actually closed their 50th anniversary you work with the Bell Labs, Harvard University, Global TED speaker, and the International Telecommunications Union. That's also where we met. So, and I've forgot so much things I can mention on rewards, whatever, and recognition. Let's first start with something which I found doing my homework on your background. You mentioned you are a neurodivergent artist, which means actually you're in very good company, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Van Gogh, and also contemporary like Billie Eilish. Is it something you mentioned that? So is it a burden or is it an honor? What is it and why do you mention it?
Well, I think before I think about it being a burden or an empowerment, like it's authentic. Like the idea that just being in school when I was younger, the way that I would sort of be pushed into what I would pay attention with, and there's a bit of a kind of archetype that, because I'm diagnosed dyslexic and ADHD, and the archetype suggests that that means that you're maybe disorganized or distracted. But what the reality is, in most cases, not all cases, is that the kind of polarization is more extreme. So you can experience like what you connect with, the way that your dopamine hits with your sort of tasks and things to do can be at a low for certain things, but it can also actually be extremely high for things that you have a passion for or a deep connection with. And in that space, it's called hyperfocus. So I've really built my career and my life around the things I felt hyper-focused with. And those things I always like really excelled. So my speaking level, my reading level, music composition, and just people. Like, so I think the reality is that you have to kind of there are many conversations about what that means. Like, I'm very proud to represent, I think, of young people growing up in difficult circumstances like myself, who are neurodivergent, feeling like they're not the norm, or that there's it's hard to find sort of art like people to look up to in that sense.
Yeah.
So I'm always really proud to talk about it, and it's only ever really aided me because I guided my life around the things that my body and my mind really connected with. So I've always seen it as a superpower, which is a quite common like term. But it really does. It's key to everything that I do, the way that I think, the fact that I'm nonlinear, multifaceted. It's definitely a byproduct of thinking differently. And I've been very grateful for that in my journey so far.
Okay. Well, before we dive into what you actually do as an artist, I was triggered by you said, okay, difficulty growing up. Was that because of the condition or was it also broader? Was that why you made
Yeah, so I mean, like it's interesting now because I work the way that I do and with the institutions that I do, but I grew up on a council estate in East London. Like from a working class background and I'm from the lower end of a working class background. So when I was growing up, like everything around me suggested that I wouldn't really do much else other than be there. But just through art and through critical thinking, in a really non-traditional way, my career has grown and grown and grown. And has been a, art has been a real focus for how I've been able to, move through opportunities and create opportunities that just wouldn't have happened unless I had something, a non-traditional approach.
Mhm.
So my parents are neurodivergent. It was a very sort of chaotic environment, like growing up, and there was a lot of distractions. But it's through voice and investigation and just like competitive sort of arts, like games like chess, like these environments where skill was the thing that opened up doors, not like who your parents were or how much money you had. Like I realized very young that if I really applied myself, like that was really the game of life. It's like I have to get better at things. I have to understand things myself. Otherwise, I'm always going to sort of have to have the cards I've been dealt with. Um, so I like I love my parents, and they did their best. But it was a hectic time. So art has been. I sometimes I describe art as a third parent. Like that was a place that I channeled a lot of my energy.
There's actually maybe an answer to a question I had already in my mind is what actually, where do you draw your own inspiration from? And that is art.
Yeah, so I mean, first I've like I one has always been my father. So my father's been very, very sort of influential because he has a similar sort of mind to me.
Mhm.
But I love the idea of having like a constellation of greatness. And what I mean by that is sometimes people can struggle to think about where they're heading, especially if they're innovating, because it tends to not have such a clear path. Like in the arts as well, sometimes when you're creating, it's not that you have some like validated reference like often. But if you look a little bit deeper, and there are certain individuals from different disciplines, whether it is poetry, literature, fine arts, entrepreneurship, that kind of exude a form of greatness. And I think if you create a constellation of those individuals, there tends to be an answer in there of what you're really looking for, what really calls you and what you find inspiring. But a little more like low level, I mean, nature is always a reference. I love the sentiment of like what maybe has never happened before, and how can that be rooted in something that is deeply from the past, something that is really fundamentally human. So I love those concepts where you have the two extremes, and that tends to make an idea whole. And the voice, which is central to all of my work, which I'm sure we'll talk about, has that all baked into it because voice is this sort of masterpiece of engineering as well as this yeah, wonderful mechanism that we use to express what's inside to outside. It kind of channels the past, but it also creates the future. And obviously, in the concept of voice and technology, these that has that polarizing like two ends that I really like, deeply human, but also future facing. So those are kind of some strategies that I apply to everything, and that keeps me engaged, which is key.
Okay, now let's take the audience to your art using your voice. How would you describe your art? What do you do?
Yes, so I started in music, so performing and the beginnings are very unexpected, but like I grew up around a lot of like electronic music in London, like experimental electronic music, some of the heavier like dance music sort of contexts, and then I channeled that all into my voice. Some people call it extended technique, some people call it like beatbox culture, like vocalizing. But really, it was like, what are all of the possible techniques in voice? And as the years went on, I just became a deep practitioner of vocal technique, and that's to the nth extreme. So multi-octave range, but beyond singing, there are hundreds of sounds that the voice can make for music composition. And voice and music is older than language. Like sound making is older than language, is older than art. So this really interesting finding in my early 20s that this kind of small group of experimentalists in voice started to find techniques and control that really got the attention of a lot of the scientific community because the voice should be kind of completed, like the genome of voice should be sort of understood. It's been around a very long time, but still there were new ideas, new ways of singing, like harmonic techniques, multiple notes at the same time, really interesting beyond sort of traditional human range vocal techniques. So I loved that. that someone today could innovate with like one of the oldest tools that, well, maybe the oldest tool that exists, that is the human voice. And that's what really sort of drove my experimentations in music. But then eventually, what I realized was obviously I am a musician, but I'm more of a researcher. Like I love to experiment. It's really about the exploration more than it is about. And I was on stage a lot. Like I toured globally. I had a lot of attention, a wonderful like community, fan base. But then I just had this moment where I switched and I said, okay, I really want to push the exploring beyond the thousands of people in the audience. I really want to kind of continue to experiment. And people like John Cage have always been like a reference. This much more avant-garde, experimental kind of world. It's again, it was one of these callings. But then naturally, kind of research and access to technology became a really natural, organic path because of that sentiment.
Wow. Now, I saw your opening at the Geneva AI for Good event last year, which was organized by the ITU. And I was wondering, do you have a message when you produce something like that? So it was an opening where you also not only presented your voice, but you also were able to visualize your voice. So I want to see if you can take us a little bit along with that visualization aspect. But do you also have, you could say, a need to look at the usefulness of what you're doing, or is it art for art's sake?
So the frame that I use for questions like that is what I call the subjective objective framework. So subjectively, right, I'm interested in pushing my voice to the absolute limit, like thinking about like just like technical low level experimentation in terms of speed control, like being world class. But that has no real relevance subjectively. It can be an artistic experience. Like if I like I did an experiment with UCL and I have the fastest recorded use of the human diaphragm and like things like this, which actually to me those things don't really mean much.
Mhm.
It's amazing displays of control, but what's interesting and much more objective is the implications of your voice in your life. And people think about language, very important. They think about their relationships, they think about their connection to the world, but they sometimes, and this is through observation, through many, many projects and many at like scale, is we have an avoidance of our own voices. Like there's a very, maybe not you, you have an amazing speaking voice and you're like super articulate, but a lot of the world hears their own voice and they have this kind of discomfort. And
Oh, yeah.
also,
Oh, I do recognize that it comes out so differently in your head and when you hear your own recording. So I
mm,
understand.
yeah, so that's one avoidance. But Sophie Scott, who's now the director of the neurology department at UCL, I've done a number of like projects with her. She's literally scanned my brain sort of 7 times for different studies, which are like voice-based studies. But she has one of my favorite quotes, which is every conversation is one of the most complex acts in all of nature, right? So when we're talking now, this is more complex than a Miles Davis solo. Like any jazz musician who is world class, it isn't actually as vast and spontaneous as and complex of what we do every day in our voices. Like the most common expertise on earth is language. Like we are pre-designed to be masterful with our voices, but we walk around all day without this realization of the beauty and the potential of our voices. And that's much more objective. So when I do these performances, obviously, like there's my subjective interest in music and there's a style, but all of my projects are really about celebrating voice, experimenting with voice, so that people can maybe stop for a moment and go, hold on, wait a minute. Like what would happen if I actually spoke up? What happens if I opened up my voice? What happens if I said the thing that I think? So all of those themes are for me are much more exciting, but I use my like sort of kind of world-class skill to just unlock those conversations. And this visual that you see behind me, like this is actually a voice-generated sculpture. So this is it's a lab-grown crystalline structure.
You do have to explain this, indeed.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that I visualize my voice in the performance. So just before I move on to that project, like whether it's a visualization of voice, whether it's an artificial voice that has been generated by like AI process, whether it's someone speaking about voice, whether it's me like displaying voice, it's the end goal is really at scale globally to try to change slightly people's avoidance of their own voices. And that sounds very general and almost like maybe a little sort of simple, but the biggest visions need that. Like I think that's really important. And I've seen it now again and again when our projects open up a voice and someone looks back in and they think, especially young people. So all of my projects are just a big excuse to celebrate voices. But obviously I am sort of central to that. And my journey, I've spent 30,000 hours plus easy training in voice, practicing as a practitioner. So I try to always stay world class in my abilities, but the theory and the thinking is that's the big part.
Okay, and the bare minimum to become an expert something is 10,000 hours. So you've completely surpassed that with your 30,000 hours.
Mm.
Now, I was wondering, I mean, I do want to come back to visualization, but maybe I approach it from a little bit differently. You're probably familiar with the whole word, song, and dance metaphor that the majority of communication is through our nonverbal communication. So, how does, you could say, your perspective on voice approach that word, song, and dance? And also maybe another question related to that. The fact that you can now A, visualize your voice as you've done in your background, and B, that a lot of the communication we are doing, like we're doing right now using Zoom rather than a phone call, have you noticed that that has an influence on someone's voice?
Yeah, I mean, so to your first question, so the first residency I did at Harvard University was actually with the phonetics department. And I was there to kind of explore as an artist in research just the concept of paralanguage.
Mhm.
So paralanguage is the kind of song and dance part that you're talking about. It's the equivalent of like body language for speak, but in voice and linguistics. So as I'm speaking now, obviously there's the semantics, there's the words that I'm saying, but the speed that I talk, like the way that my voice goes up and down, the accent that I have, all of these things are like meta signals that we really don't have. There is obviously conscious response to that, but there's a lot of subconscious psychoanalysis that is hardwired into us that builds a profile about that person. And there's a lot of information about us that's in our voices that actually sits completely perpendicular to what we're saying. So obviously we have this huge sort of emphasis on what we're saying, like that is very, very important. But a huge part of our identity, like a huge part of our relationships, and there is evidence of even our quality of life is affected by how we control and own our voices, the signaling that we put out. So one example that I give is that if we were giving this interview and I only ever spoke like this was my communication the whole time, there was never any variation or change.
It'd be a
How
short
would this
interview.
affect? Well, and I'm going to keep going. So excuse the listeners, but how would this affect my relationships, my working relationships, my like lovers, partners? So you get the idea, right? So so actually, just by like revealing the kind of the difference, there is a whole world of influence on your life by the sort of awareness and control and the energy that you put out. And it's not to kind of change your voice because I think that it's not really, people think it might be inauthentic, but your voice is part of the body. Like the voice is both the body and the mind.
Mhm.
And the voice is a physical thing. And being aware of that contribution just by acknowledging that, which is invisible to many, many, many people, there are significant changes. So to your second question about online, So we've lost a lot of body language, and we've lost a lot of our sort of other signalers for our competency, for our personality. So the voice becomes much more essential. And the voice as a sort of self-brand
Yeah.
of who you are, it represents like even more through this platform. So to be sort of self-aware about these things, and especially in this format, is essential these days. I think it's such an essential thing to just stop for a moment and think, like, what else is possible in voice? What are other ways of me thinking about this? And we've all had an awkward conversation. We've all had to give a disciplinary about something at work. Like tone of voice is the kind of contextual additional music to that information, and it changes everything. So I'm here to kind of open up that door for many at scale, and it's definitely not boring.
It's if you look at all the projects you're doing, it should be amazing to travel the world and just use your voice to open up doors and get people thinking differently. Um, do had a question in that you also combine your voice, or you make a lot of use of technology. How was technology introduced to you, and how are you using it today?
So the story that I always tell is the reason I've always been open to technology. Especially in the last sort of 6, 7 years, I never had the same biases or kind of avoidance that others may have, simply because I have a chess background. So while I was growing up in this kind of working class like context, I also fell in love with chess. Like chess was a kind of another sort of out for me in
Yeah.
some way. So I became a county level player. Like I was a strong club player for my age. I won a lot of tournaments in my teens, and played for my county. But a lot of my peers at that time were more sort of they had more resources, let's say. So they had chess coaches. They were like traveling to tournaments more with like teams and support. Where like me and my dad would like just about make it to tournaments, and then I obviously couldn't get a coach. So my dad bought me a chess engine, so a physical chessboard that had these things have been around for a very long time. So effectively like a chess agent by today's like language. And this was 20 years ago, right? So the structure of having something that I'm passionate about and having this system that never gets tired of playing you, has great insight, and I got a lot better by playing this system. So that taught me at a very young age that technology can assist you. It can make you stronger in what you do. And that's still a narrative today. And that's what I've brought to a lot of my work, is this kind of what is quite a sort of established concept in game theory. All the best chess players in the world right now are augmented. They're like centaurs. They have this, they don't have an AI with them in world-class matches, but they study, they train, they develop insights with engines. So I just apply that across the arts, like the same idea. And that was a kind of the first introduction. The second was really when I stepped away from music and I started to get more and more offers from academic institutions as an artist in research. So first through like was this the series of voice-based studies with UCL, which it was just so interesting to kind of have like a neurological insight into how I control my voice. The first study I did was really about like regions of motor control, because I can hyper isolate. So I have a much heightened ability to control and isolate my voice, because the voice isn't just a voice. Like there's tens and tens of muscles that are controlling what's in there. So that was the eureka moment, that aha moment. Wow. So I can learn more about myself with every bit of tech that I get access to. And then AI really came into my sphere in 2016, which was my, again, the first visit to Harvard University, where I met CJ Carr from DataBots, who's an incredible computer scientist and artist in his own right. And my life was never the same, really, from that point onwards.
Great. Now, has it been a smooth ride all those years, or have there been failures, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, the main challenge is how non-linear, like having to find a path,
Yeah.
like with such untraditional kind of set of skills, and simply through kind of critical thinking, learning, understanding sort of the strategies and structures of partnerships and relationships, um, like being approached by like Yeff, for example, and the first time I went to the meeting of champions in China for the forum and just seeing how every single like global institution which is thought leadership has a different sort of way of thinking, different language, different structures. So that was always very tough, having to kind of always be the anomaly, like being this kind of wild card that, I mean, the first few times I thought it was simply luck. Like there was, oh, surely this is a one interesting opportunity, one interesting academic partnership, but I never expected it to just keep coming. And for the last 8 years, I mean, you listed some of the names, but it's just continued to grow. And so that's a success, but there has been very like sort of lonely, questioning moments. Why am I just making up? Why am I pushing to fight for art on these stages? Why am I going into these deeply like conservative, much more strategic kind of global environments to argue that artists have a place?
Okay.
And
Can
and
you
that's
answer
not
that
always
question?
agreed with. What's that?
Can you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I'm very biased, everyone, so you shouldn't listen to me. But uh artists, and especially specifically a certain breed of artists. So let's say like not all artists, but there are artists out there that are really like the tip of the spear when it comes to innovation. Like if you look at culture and how culture tends to integrate new ideas, it was entertainment, but that was much more fiction. So new ideas would come in. But if you look at a lot of the sort of tech-based concepts, the first wave of interaction with society was science fiction,
Mhm.
which has a lot of negatives. Like that's why there's a lot of bias and a lot of fighting. But if you think about AI and like deep fakes, for example, the way that those sort of became a language that was integrated by everyone was through misuse and creativity and the arts. So the artists and specifically creative technologists in the modern age, they're living relationships with technology that are intimate and much more sort of intertwined that indicate the ways that people will be using these technologies 3, 5, 10 years to sort of come from now. So when you find those artists that are really exemplary with their partnership with technology, you really are looking into the future. There's many, many lessons. And then the other kind of sentiment that is much more obvious is if you have a great technology and it involves in any way like use by the general public, the storytelling is essential. Like you are often limited in the engagement for that sort of set of ideas or that technology by the biases that exist out there. So the current narratives that can be anti that technology, but also just is it reaching people outside of your kind of pre-validated individuals that are engaging with it. So the artists are the enzymes of change. They're the ones that create new possibility. They open up new doors, this kind of eros of new progression. And if it's a B2B product and you're creating sort of warehouse technology, then that's the game of efficiency and the game of hardcore value. Does that tool work? But anything that has a consumer, anything that is about society, I think artists are the ones that update with much more power and truth and this kind of directorial creative direction, research, storytelling strategy are kind of fusing into these new media creative technology projects. And that's why there's more and more partnerships happening. So that's my take, my very biased take. But I've seen it again and again. And with the attrition of being at many, many conferences and events now, there is an undeniable part of that. And I just see this trend like increasing kind of exponentially, especially as creativity becomes kind of synonymous with digital and artificial kind of technologies.
And I think you have a growing group of people who support that vision, that we realize that we should not focus on STEM, but on STEAM. So add the arts to our education, because that's where the creativity, the human element still comes into play.
So, but I just will add one thing, like, so it's really important to define creativity. And like my definition and the studio's definition is intelligence is the ability to repeat pre-validated cycles. So you know something that works, you know this path trodden, and you're able to execute that. That's an intelligence. But creative intelligence is when you can effectively emergently create new cycles of value based on the changes in the world. So there's an element, it's the individuals, like entrepreneurs and artists are very similar because they find that emergent value, that thing that is needed, but that doesn't 100% exist. And that is creativity, that is lateral problem solving. And I see that is the true core of this new breed of the arts and creativity. It's not a paintbrush and a canvas. It's the ability to think laterally and create value in environments that have not existed before. And that's the game of vision. Like vision work is a kind of a different breed to intelligence, which is amazing, but there's a slight difference there, and it's a much more practical way of framing it as opposed to other sort of things. And that's when it clicks into place with STEAM, like you said, as opposed to just decorative arts, which is still very important, but art with utility can exist.
Good. Hey, I'm conscious of our time. I'm gonna normally end with a question how people want to remember you, but I want to give it a little bit of twist this time, Harry, because as mentioned in introduction, also people know you as Reeps 100. First of all, why that name? But more importantly, how do you want people to remember you, as Harry Yeff or Reeps 100?
So Reeps 100 came because I had like an artist name before, which was Reeps 1, which just came from lots of different environments that I was like growing up. And when I started to give more sort of theory-based like presentations, it was quite interesting because I would speak at United Nations, they would Google me, and then they would see me maybe starting like a mosh pit at Reading Festival like 10 years ago, which is still a huge part of my journey and a big part of me. But the 100 was really when I founded my studio and my company. It's the evolution. It's much more the whole holistic experimentation. So like directing international ballet, like Voice Gems as a global voice archive, all of these projects are things that come through the evolution of me, which is the 100. So my honest answer is I am Harry Yeff. I am Reeps 100. I am both, and I leave it to you to decide.
Great. Hey, Harry, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time. If people are interested and curious of what you said, we'll make certain that they get the link to the exercise to the website so they can find out more about what you've been doing and what you still are going to do. I enjoyed this tremendously, listening to you speak, listening to your voice and your insights on the power of the voice. And again, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.